Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Chang, and the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel. And it's where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. And joining me today is my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson. Dr. Curt Thompson. Curt, welcome.
Curtis, so great to be with you. Thanks so much for the invitation. Always a pleasure.
Well, Dr. Curt Thompson, he's a psychiatrist that has written a number of well-received books, including The Soul of Shame and The Soul of Desire. And he's out with an excellent new book that I got a chance to read and offer a testimonial for. It's called The Deepest Place, Suffering and the Formation of Hope. So, Curt, you have written about so many other topics connecting faith with aspects of mental health, desire, shame. Why suffering now? What triggered your move into this topic?
Yeah, there's clearly a progression in the books that I've written. Each from the first one on, each subsequent book has grown out of something that came from the book that preceded it, and this is no different. And I think that in the course of doing the work on the most recent book on desire and beauty, it became clear that if that is the world that we truly long for and want to co-create with God as we anticipate his new heaven and earth coming, that in that book there is a series of 4 questions that we explore, one of which Jesus putting to James and John the question, can you drink the cup? And I think over the last few years, as we've been, working through these issues of neuroscience and faith development, of what the role of the shame plays, the role that beauty plays in responding to shame, we come to terms with the fact that if we are going to be on this road of journeying with Jesus, that suffering is a necessary feature that everybody is going to experience and encounter. And it is the suffering, whether it's something that is happening to us from the outside, something that we're doing to ourselves, which encompasses a lot of our suffering, or the suffering that we experience by virtue of allowing Jesus to peel off all the scales, as Aslan peeled off the scales of Eustace, the dragon in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It just struck me, oh my goodness, this becomes the fulcrum on which all of our decisions are like hinging. And I think I would say that it came to me that this book is a way to honor that. It is a way to explicitly name that if we are going to do this work of being reflections and bearers of the image of God, that in this world, as we wait for the consummation of creation in this world, that process necessarily is going to be one that entails suffering. And the question is not, do we suffer? The question then is, what do we do with and in our suffering? And what does it look like for us to honor it in the process?
I want to probe that a little further because I think, 3 minutes in, we're into something I think very profound here, because you're saying your last book, which is The Soul of Desire, sets you up for this book on suffering. So there's some deep connection between desire for beauty even, and suffering. And you mentioned that in that book, Soul of Desire, you had that question drawn from Mark 10 of Jesus asking James and John, can you drink this cup that I am to drink? What's interesting to me is just a couple of verses before that, Jesus offers a sobering word to James and John. He says, you do not know what you are asking for.
Right.
And you do not know what you are longing for. You do not know what you desire. And so is what you're saying that if we desire beauty and goodness in our life, we may not know what we're asking for, because embedded in that very desire is then the cup of suffering, that if you really want beauty, you need to be able to be ready to drink suffering. Is that where you're going at? Is that the connection?
Well, I think in some respects, it's simply and no more or less than just the observation of the world as it is. The real world, not some fantasy world that we would like and that we make believe that we're living in. I have this supercomputer that I carry around with me in my pocket, made
Yeah.
by Apple,
Yeah.
and I use it frequently to escape the real world and instead live in a fantasy world, a world of distraction, a world in which there is no pain, a world where I don't have to suffer, where I don't have to pay any attention to that. But in the real world, the world that we read about in the biblical narrative, we read about a world in which we, as image bearers of God, have had eternity placed in our hearts. And that's not just about a measurement of time, that's a measurement of the depth of desire for
Yeah.
beauty and goodness in the world.
Yeah.
And that same world in which that we occupy with this eternity in our hearts is also a world in which we handed over the rule of this world to evil on the third page of the Bible.
Yep.
And that means that even though the longing persists, evil wants to hijack that longing in order
Yeah.
to devour us in the world. And so suffering becomes a feature and perhaps even the seminal representation of the movement toward the light, toward beauty and goodness. It is the feature of the cost we will pay for living in this world where we've handed dominion over to evil, and yet our longing for beauty and goodness still remains. And so it is that suffering that I don't want to enter into that causes me to want to collaborate with evil. Eve didn't want to have to, she didn't want to have to put up with the suffering of the
Yeah.
moment of choice. And so it's easier to take from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'm faced with these kinds of choices every day, all day, rather than sit within my suffering, acknowledge it, and allow you, for instance, my friend, to be with me in it,
Mhm.
and acknowledge that in the course of being in it, we not only honor it, but we invite God to be in it and allow him to use that very suffering as part of the realization and the formation of beauty and goodness in the world, ourselves not the least being one of those objects.
Kurt, it seems like then if we are people who are made to desire, and we are also people who have handed the world over to evil, such that invariably evil is in the world to block the full fulfillment of that desire, then we at least have two options, probably more, but at least two. Dominant one strikes me is we can try to engineer our lives to get around suffering.
Mm,
This is this,
mm,
like you said, we can go to the smartphone to call up some service that will
mhm,
somehow take away the suffering in some way, or we could ratchet down our desire
mhm,
such that we actually like numb ourselves from actually
mhm,
desiring more.
mhm,
Talk about
mhm.
those two options. How do you see these two options played out? For instance, in your patients that you see.
Well, I mean, these two options are my patients. That's why I have patients, right? I mean, like,
And that's what's
I
funding the
mean,
practice.
yeah, I mean, exactly. Thank you very much to the general population. Um, but again, this sense that we long to be relieved of our distress, right? We like to say that when the brain is left on its own, when the brain is left to its own accord, it will do whatever it can to most expeditiously reduce its distress.
Mhm.
And I can do that by, through my addictions, which are really about distraction. I can distract myself, or I can distract myself in a bit of a different way by just simply pretending that I'm going to bury it
Yeah.
instead of like playing to it.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily have a way to be with it in order for what it represents to be healed,
Yeah.
in order for that place where I do suffer to itself be transformed such that even my comprehension of the suffering and its purpose and its meaning itself is transformed in the process. Even the even the suffering we undergo, the arc of the biblical narrative would suggest that God is even going to transform and renew that at the
Mhm.
coming and the fullness of the new age.
Yeah. Well, so if, as Christians, we then are called not to give into the ways of the world, which would invite us to engineer some way to get around the suffering or to numb ourselves, to ratchet down the underlying desire that is causing that, when frustrated, causes us suffering.
Mhm.
Say more about this option that you are writing your book to invite people through, of going through going through the suffering as an opportunity for transformation. What does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing that it looks like is this. We say when people come into my office, or when people come to see a pastor, or when people
Okay.
come to you as a consultant,
Mhm.
the way that we often frame what is drawing me to come to see someone is that I have a problem,
Yeah.
and they want the problem to be solved. And you and we know this, right? Certainly, we're not suggesting that there are no problems in the world, but what we are suggesting is that the problem is real. When I say, when someone comes to see me and says I'm having panic attacks, or I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm drinking too much, or whatever, and this is all bad brain behavior. One of my responses is often, actually, your brain is behaving exactly as it should under the circumstances in which you expect it to live. It's like my smoke detector in my kitchen going off when I'm cooking bacon. I don't like my look, it's just bacon. There's no fire in the kitchen. Could you please just stop?
Yeah.
But it's doing its job. I don't like it, but it's doing its job. And so consequently, um, we begin with our pain, and we want to get the pain stopped without recognizing that the first thing that we need when it comes to the pain that we present to the psychiatrist or to the pastor is, we need, without even knowing it, the pastor or the psychiatrist is going to meet someone with mercy. Not just mercy for your pain, but mercy for what is behind your pain that you don't
Mm.
even know, because you're not paying attention to that, where your suffering really lies.
Mm.
And so this is why these first 5 verses of Romans, which this book explores, we begin with this notion that long before we get to suffering in the text, we really start with this question of secure attachment, this notion of justified by faith. This, our lives are made reasonable by deep, secure attachment with God. And that
Mhm.
happens by virtue of my connection with the body of Jesus. And that declares that even the parts of me that I still believe have been at war with God, that God is really not coming to kill me in those places. God's coming with peacemaking in mind.
Yeah.
And this then leads to this experience of, there, little by little by little, this part of me that experiences God's glory, that I can have hope in God's glory. Wow. And how then I can then even glory, even in my suffering, this glory that Lewis writes about in The Weight of Glory, and that we read about in John's gospel, this glory, that of the Son, the Son and the Father, this
Yeah.
relational sense, this sense that that Jesus is the object of God's greatest desire himself, his greatest delight, his greatest pleasure, that is who we are. Now, of course, when I'm in the middle of having panic attacks, imagining that I am the object of God's pleasure is really not on my radar screen.
Yeah.
But the reason that I'm having panic attacks is because for a long time, things have happened to me that have me persuaded that I am not only not God's object of desire, but I am God's object of wrath. And when that happens, when we begin to confront that, and we begin to nudge up against being loved, being seen, soothed, safe, secure by the pastor, by the psychiatrist, by the consultant, we find that suffering starts to take on a different shape. Because it's one thing for me to suffer in isolation, which is the brain's biggest problem with it. It's another thing for me to experience this pain in the presence of someone else who says, I'm not leaving the room.
Hmm. And that ultimately, we ultimately have God who has said he won't leave the room with us. I find that so interesting that you draw these connections between this fundamental human fear of abandonment to these other experiences like
Mm.
suffering, because it's not always obvious. We just think of suffering as pain. We
Mhm.
don't think of suffering as actually deeply interwoven with this fear of abandonment. I remember when I was talking with you. Remember when we met at that very early morning
Mhm.
breakfast at
Coffee, yeah.
Starbucks? You,
Yeah.
yeah, you brought this up, and so that clicked for me because I opened my book in the anxiety opportunity with a story of being a latchkey kid, and when you made that connection, I was like, oh, that's why I opened that story with it. I was doing it instinctively because,
Mhm.
at least behind anxiety, is this fear of abandonment, and that was, the fundamental fear of my latchkey kid self. But I want you to unpack just a little more suffering. Why is suffering so connected with the fear of abandonment? Like
Yeah.
what's going on there? Even at the neurobiological level, like draw the
Yeah.
connections for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's kind of like asking the question, why do we have gravity? Like, I don't really know why we have gravity, but like, it's undeniable. If I trip and fall, and I'm going to scrape my knee, like, I can't answer that question why, but we do know this. We know that human beings, like our greatest distress is registered. We register our distress. Newborns, infants register their distress, their anxiety, primarily as a response to the sense of a parent moving away from them. So this isn't even just about, what I think first in my mind. Oh, I think someone is leaving me. It is a neurobiological, it is a somatically, physically perceived sense that you are moving away with the intention of not thinking about me, not coming for me. Precognitively, my little newborn or infant brain doesn't have a prefrontal cortex that can register, oh, I don't think Curtis really likes me anymore. I'm not
Right.
thinking that.
This is deeply wired into kind of our very core, our brain structure, you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then and lo and behold, on the second page of the Bible, we have this reflection in which God reflects and says, "Hmm, this is not complete. It is not good for the man to be alone. Like that's not
Hmm.
going to work here. To be fully like us, the man is going to need to be like us,
Yeah.
male and female, right? That he's made them. And so we recognize from the beginning that all anxiety, from a neurobiological perspective, primally emerges from this sense, this perception of being left. And this is different. This is not like the child leaving the parents, as they are wont to do in order for them to develop and grow, in order for them eventually to become adults that have an increasingly adult kind of relationship with the parents that is fully mature. This is about the parents leaving the child.
Hmm.
This is about the one who is above in the power gradient,
Yeah.
whether that's parents, whether that's God, whether that's the employer, whether that's whoever that is, leaving those who are dependent upon them, truly.
It's abandonment. It's the feeling
Right,
of abandonment.
exactly, is
Right?
what it is.
Yeah.
And it felt sense, and my anxiety registers that sooner than it registers anything else. And so ultimately, all anxiety at some point at the end of the day is about I'm going to be left alone living in a box under a bridge.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what I'm
Yeah.
going to do. And the whole notion of Good Friday, in addition to paying for sin, is also a statement by God, this atonement, this at one meant from the Old English word to be fully with us, at one with us. Even when First Peter writes about how Jesus preaches to the dead, this notion that Jesus is going to all the lengths to make sure that we know that we are not alone in this, and then bring us out through resurrection. But like,
Yeah.
I can't, the parts of me that need to be resurrected, it's going to be hard for them to be resurrected if I won't let Jesus have them.
Yeah.
Because I'm too afraid of the intimacy that, like, he wants to come into these rooms in my house where my suffering is, the things that happened to me in the sexual abuse, or my father's alcoholism, or the scarcity of the poverty we lived in, or all the things that, whatever. If I just want to lock those away, it means I'm going to have to burn energy to keep them away, because my brain is going to be looking for access. My brain is going to
Yeah.
be looking for somebody to find it. And if I won't let Jesus have that, that is energy that I'm going to burn containing it, that is not available to me to create the beauty and goodness in the world that he longs to create from before
Yeah.
the foundation of the world.
Well, your reference to Good Friday also raises again this theme of that actually the only way to deal with then the suffering that comes from abandonment is to go through it and go
Mm.
through it with Jesus, with the
Mhm.
one who himself experienced abandonment. I mean, that is the narrative of the cross, is that on a subjective level, Jesus experienced from his end what humans experience and most deeply fear experiencing, which is abandonment. And yet
Well,
he clung on and gone through that, believing God had not actually abandoned him, even as he felt abandoned. Right?
yeah, and so here's I will say this. This is a conversation that I have, and of course, I'm not sure if this is true for you, but the way that our sense of that that Jesus has this felt sense of abandonment often comes from Matthew's gospel, from the cross, where he quotes the
Yeah.
first opening verse of of Psalm 22. And what I would, my response to that is that I have to say, Curtis, I'm not persuaded. In fact, I am supremely persuaded that Jesus did not feel abandoned. Because when you look at what Matthew's gospel is, it's a gospel to the Jews, and replete throughout it is references to all kinds of Old Testament scriptures in which all you need is like one line, and they know that
Yeah.
they're talking about the
Sure.
40th chapter of Isaiah. And when you read the entirety of Psalm 22, we recognize that we get to the end, and it is a psalm of vindication. It is a psalm of victory. It is a psalm of God finding him. This is not to say that Jesus doesn't have feelings of this.
Yeah.
This feeling, this sense. And at the same time, it is a story of Jesus, even in the middle of those feelings, modeling for us things that he is paying attention to his Father being with him, even in the middle of this.
Right.
Which comes because he is so steeped in paying attention to the presence of God in the middle of really, really difficult things, which is what then the body of Jesus is invited to do.
Right. Yes,
All right.
I would read that as that statement. Oh my God, why have you forsaken me? Is precisely he's quoting the longer psalm. The number, which psalm it is escaping me right now. But it's exactly right. It's near that psalm narrates the experience of starting in a subjective experience of abandonment and coming to the end objective truth and reality that God will vindicate, has not abandoned him. And so I think it's a both and in the terms of, at least my reading is, Jesus subjectively participated in the experience of human abandonment, and yet did not abandon the objective truth that God, his Father, had not abandoned him. Somehow in Jesus, both the human and the divine truth hold together, which is who Jesus is, in that. And but it seems like it is. Boy, that is hard to go through that. It is hard. That is the cross. And that is what suffering is to acknowledge the true feeling subjectively of abandonment that's going on, and yet work our way through that feeling, not denying it, not suppressing it, but work our way through to that objective truth that God on his end has not actually abandoned us.
And I'll say, like, it's hard to do that, not least in the culture in which we live, in which we are continually trained to assume that we should not suffer. We are continually trained through those same supercomputers in our pockets. We are continually trained to be unable to delay gratification. I want instant gratification. And any sense of distress that I have is an indicator not that there is something about me that now needs to be made more resilient. It is an indicator that there's something wrong in the environment that needs to be corrected so that I no longer have to feel this.
Yeah.
And it is, and so I would say, like, to our listeners, it is difficult not just because suffering is hard, because it is. I mean, why else would we call it that, right? It is our response to pain over time. It is difficult, but it is also difficult because we live in a world in which evil wants to persuade us not to engage with it. And this is challenging because, Jesus asks this question of James and John, and to your point, Curtis, earlier, like y'all don't know what you're asking. Like, if you're really serious about getting on board with this project, you need to know that I was really serious when I said, pick up your cross and follow me. I didn't say pick up your Tesla and drive with me. And so this it is not to suggest that, I'm to wear like a hair suit, like I'm supposed to plan to suffer. It is to suggest that if I'm going to walk to the light, doing so is going to create resistance in the systems that I'm leaving. It's going to, and those systems having to do even with some of my own, my own soul. Not least which bring whether those resistances are in my family of origin, whether those resistances are even in the church, or they're even in the place where I work, and so forth and so on. And so this notion that we suffer because of things that have happened to us, we suffer because of things that we do to ourselves, and we suffer because we are walking to the light. So much of God's work within us is really about addressing the first two in healthier ways so that we can then put more energy to living with the suffering that's going to come in the third way.
Curt, a lot of what we've been talking about feels very both true, but also I am channeling like friends of mine who are going through suffering right now.
Right.
Two of my friends have received in the last 3 months severe cancer diagnosis and are going through the suffering of chemo right now. I'm channeling them and I'm thinking, okay, here are these two guys talking about, go now, don't avoid suffering, don't, numb yourselves from it, go through it. And then I'm thinking, boy, how are they hearing this? Like, how does this actually work out when somebody is going through very intense suffering? What does this translate into practices, behaviors that actually take us through suffering with Jesus rather than
Right.
trying to avoid it or trying to numb ourselves to it?
Right. Well, I think one of the reasons why I find this text in Romans 5 to be helpful, first of all, is that we're reminded that Paul is not writing to an individual. He's writing to a community. And when I read the text, it's easy for me, Curt, to imagine that it's just me who's reading it. And then, so when Paul says, well, it's suffering, perseverance, character, hope, that somehow I, on my own, have to figure out how to do that. And that's not the assumption that Paul would have been making. Paul is writing to a community in which he's assuming that we are going to do this together. And so the first significant assumption that we have to make and that we have to plan for is, in terms of the mechanics of what do we do, is look around and ask the question, by whom are we being deeply known on a regular basis?
Huh.
Who is in my life? Who is with me such that they are able to be with me and my suffering and not treat me like Job's friends did? Because eventually, like, they just couldn't keep their yap shut. They had to eventually say well, okay, what did you do? What?
Yeah.
We have to come up with an explanation for this, because now your suffering is making us nervous. Now I'm uncomfortable with it. I feel powerless to change this situation. So I don't know. We got to figure out what this is, instead of just saying, look, horrible things happen to people.
Yeah.
And when that horrible thing happens to my friend,
Yeah.
I'm going to be with my friend in it. Like, if you're going to be a physician, you're going to be an oncologist, you're going to watch a lot of people die. And the mission is not just about saving everybody, because we all know nobody gets out alive, right? We all, right?
That's
but
right.
what it does
We're all
mean is
terminal.
I am going to be with you in this. This is the theme of the biblical arc. This is God to Moses. This is God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is God to Joshua. I am with you, and not with me like the chair is with me in the room, but I am with you, looking at me, and my gaze upon you with loving kindness, even in the face of this horrible thing that is happening. And so I would, of your friends, and I lost 3 brothers to cancer, and in every single situation, and one of those brothers, I was with him as he took his last breath, and I wanted simply to be with him. I'm not going to stop this train.
Yeah.
But I am going to be on the tracks when it passes by. I'm going to be on the train with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
And this is what, again, this notion of Good Friday, of Jesus being with us.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the mechanic, I said earlier that, I wrote this book I think, to honor the suffering that our patients go through. And I'm reminded of a conversation that a patient of mine made now many, many months ago, after having been working with me for literally 20 years.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that we can do with our suffering is that we look around at other people who's they have cancer, or they lost their son in the war, or they've, got they had, some kind of serious medical issue, or they've got some kind of serious, family issue. And we're like, my suffering is not that bad. Look, I don't really suffer, because look at me. My life is great. There's no suffering here, which of course is horse hooey. It is a matter of comparing so as not to look at my own suffering.
Right. Right.
And this person that's in my practice, working for 20 years, I mean, one of the things that we discover is that, there are people who have families, who have parents who live into their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and who are not demented and who are not medically compromised, who find ways to continue to behave badly in the world,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
85-year-old parents who continue to behave badly and continue to reinforce and foster a family system of abuse and of dismissal, all the while going to church every Sunday morning, all the while like claiming things. And this patient of mine is someone who grew up in this family and who still has contact with them because this person's parents are aged and still live in the neighborhood. And what are we going to do? And one day, something else had happened yet again to reactivate all this old stuff. And she said, I have been doing this for 25 years. Why have I not gotten this figured out? Why has this not stopped?
Yeah.
Again, there is a certain suffering that she undergoes merely by being willing to stay on the narrow path. Every now and again, she is like evil wants to come back around and tempt her to be sucked back into a system of abuse. And when she says no, there is a certain suffering that she undergoes by having to once again work through those old things. And this is the thing, Curtis. There is the sense when we read the gospel, Jesus, we would read of a Jesus who would say, I totally get this
Yeah.
because I've been at this since the third page of the Bible.
That's right.
And like you can imagine, like, in Genesis 1, where the council, right, when the divine council gathers around and God says, let us make mankind. This is like, let's have a conversation about this. And you can imagine some people saying like, I don't think this is a very good idea. Like, well, you can imagine what they're going to do. And God decides that he loves us too much not to do this.
Yeah.
And so this suffering that we sometimes also entail has everything to do with our willingness to stay the course. But in the presence of community, the community says, gosh, I have those things in my own life too. I'm not leaving the room. We will continue to suffer together, which is how suffering itself is transformed.
So, Curt, in this invitation to join with others in their suffering, to be on the tracks, like you said, when you were describing that experience for yourself with your brother, you got emotional. And as somebody talking to you, I felt like that is something beautiful that Curt is describing, and also something profoundly terrifying. The depths of feeling that probably listeners just could pick up, remotely in the timbre and pause and the breaking of your voice. There's a depth to that I find like that's beautiful and that's terrifying. Can you say more to those of us who are near people who are suffering? Part of us wants to draw near to that in that very close sharing of suffering you're talking about. And then some of us feels terrified by this. I've got a friend who is in our church who has had a rapid neurological disease happening such that he's a shell of himself. He's barely functioning, very conscious. He's not really mobile. This is a 40-year-old guy who up until 2 years ago was playing basketball. And tomorrow, on my sort of a Sabbath day, my wife and I are going to go visit him in his care facility. And I am terrified of doing that. I mean, every time I go, I'm terrified of doing that. And all these feelings of, it'll make me feel uncomfortable. It'll make me feel sad. It will make me feel, I think that makes me anxious for myself and my future. What will be my demise will be like. I mean, so many things come up. Help listeners who are on the surrounding the sufferer side of things. How do we work through our own experience of suffering and our own impulses to actually not draw near, but to avoid?
Well, okay. I mean, we know that we're not trying to turn this into a psychotherapy session, and I have no intention of doing that. And at the same time,
I am going to be charging by the hour to all listeners.
Right,
so.
right. And at the same time, the first thing I want to say is I'm just really sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
Mm.
sorry about your friend, and I'm sorry for you because um, when we lose any part of something or someone we love, we lose a part of ourselves.
Mm.
And that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's death trying to put its
That's right.
hand on our shoulder.
Mm.
The death that God's talking about in when he warns Adam in Genesis 2. I think then what happens is that you're right. We become afraid of ourselves.
Mm.
I become afraid that I'm going to feel something
Yeah.
that is unpleasant. And my sense is I'm not going to be able to tolerate
Yeah.
what I'm feeling. I can't, I'm worried that I won't be able to tolerate me.
Yeah.
And here's what is important. We like to say that if I'm feeling anything that is being evoked in response to something that I'm encountering with someone else, you can believe that the feeling that is evoked within me is not just about what's happening to them. That feeling is coming from my own experience somewhere. There's some part of my story that is coming into the room.
Mm.
Some part of my story in which something happened to me that shouldn't have, or something didn't happen to me that should have, where there's been some kind of a rupture that has not been repaired. And I was left with this particular feeling of sadness, of grief, of anxiousness, of whatever. I was left to do something with it by myself. And those emotions of distress were never intended to be dealt with in isolation by ourselves. They were
Mm.
intended to be co-regulated with someone else. It's not good for the man to be alone. This is the primary mechanics of attachment. When an infant is in distress, the parent helps the infant learn to
Yeah.
co-regulate their distress. And so we bring our own stories to the table that are now coming into the room when we are sitting with our friend who is suffering.
Mm.
And so it becomes an opportunity, if we are open to it, it becomes an opportunity for Jesus not just to bring comfort and healing to our friend through our presence, but he also longs to bring healing and comfort to us and the parts of
Mm.
our stories that are being invited into the room because we have elected to come to where the suffering actually is.
Yeah.
And this is Jesus saying, it's not those who are well whom I've come for. It's those who are not well. And we all have, myself included, I have parts of me that are not yet well that I have kept out of Jesus' sightline. This
Yeah.
is the woman in Mark 5 who has the bleeding problem, who comes with a plan, right? Commando healing, get in, get the job done, get out, tag on his
Mm.
robe. And then he
Yeah.
has a completely other plan, right? He's going to come for everything.
Yeah.
Things that she was way too ashamed to present, even more so, I mean, so much so that she might not even be thinking that those are things that he could address. But this is what happens. We want to come and be a presence for healing for our friend who's now in this supremely suffering state, only to discover that Jesus is going to heal everybody within a 5-mile radius of this.
For sure.
And so my invitation for you would be, know that Jesus wants to be in the room with you with those feelings.
Yeah.
He's in the room and he's not looking at you with any sense of disdain or any sense of why are you feeling this? He's looking at you in the room when you feel all this and he's going to wink at you and he's going to say, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And if you're able to name these things, you can be sure that in so doing, in the presence of your friend is going to know that you feel what he feels.
Mm.
All the worry, all the fear. For him to not be alone by virtue of your naming that you are experiencing things that for sure are part of his story as well.
Yeah.
And in this way, nobody is left alone. When two or more gather in my name, the Spirit is going to come to the room and do things that y'all are not in charge of. The wind blows where it will, and it's going to come and do its work. And little do we know that, oh my gosh, all these things that I'm starting to feel, I would much rather just like leave those things at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus is saying like, no, actually, I want them in the room. I want you to be curious about this. I want what's happening with your friend to be an opportunity for me to do work with you in parts of your story that you didn't know. We're going to come into the room.
Kurt, that's beautiful, and that is a profound invitation. And just to restate it for myself, if not for our listeners, you're saying that when we are trying to draw near to those suffering, and we feel that resistance, we feel that avoidance in us, that's actually Jesus' invitation to us, that for our growth and healing, such that we are not just mere delivery vehicles of healing for others, but in that process, we are recipients of healing for ourselves, because in that resistance, there's something that has, like you said, our own story of abandonment is being triggered, and it's an opportunity for Jesus to touch that part of ourselves.
Absolutely. If we are open to it, when we enter into the suffering of others, you can be guaranteed that if we are willing, that Jesus is going to come for the suffering of everyone. We like to say in our work, my colleague and friend Courtney Morrison, yeah, she has this phrase that she uses that I find to be so helpful: that emotion, the deep soul emotion of the soul, is contagious.
Yeah.
Which means that if someone is suffering and somebody else comes into the room and is open, you can guarantee that the Spirit is going to use the way we are made as human beings to speak to the suffering of others who have come, because Jesus is wanting to heal everyone who is willing,
Yeah.
and to be present with all of our suffering in the process.
Kurt, I want to now turn to those who are suffering, because we've been talking a lot about those surrounding the sufferers. I want to take on the perspective of those who are suffering. And I want to go back to the Mark 10 passage, because again, the triggering request from James and John in that passage is, first of all, they say, we want you to do whatever we ask you to do. And then he says, we want to be on your right and left when you come into your glory. They want to participate in glory. And then Jesus says, you don't really know what you're asking for. In other words, you don't really know what this glory thing is all about. Then it talks about, look, what this glory thing is going to be about: drinking the cup I'm about to drink, which means glory is somehow wrapped up in suffering, that the path to glory goes through suffering. So that sounds wonderful, but again, talk now to the person suffering. Talk now to the person going through chemo who has just lost a loved one. That does not feel glory. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of glory going on there, Kurt. How do we invite people to go through the suffering so that they can at least glimpse the glory there?
Well, it's what I will respond by recounting what my brother, the first of my three brothers who passed away from cancer, said to me nearing the end of his journey, when he said, I would not wish what's happened to me on my worst enemy, but I can tell you without question that I am not sorry that this has happened. And he could go on to say that because of this, there was great transformation of him relationally with in his marriage, with his children, with his friends, with me. And suffering puts us in positions in which we are given choices to make. And the choice can either be, I'm going to allow God to bring me into the presence of others and himself more deeply.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to run away from that and suffer even more greatly. And so I think it's not again, I write in the opening page of the book, look, if I wanted to read a book about this, it'd be like, how can I read a book that will help me not have to suffer as much? Or it would just go away. That's the book I want to read. But what this is saying is, look, suffering is part of who we are, because it is the way that we manifest and express the results of our decision to hand over ourselves and the world to evil. And given that that's the case, what are we going to do in the face of it? And God is saying that even in the face of that, I'm still coming for you. I'm still asking for your connection. I'm still longing to have a relationship with you. I'm still longing for you to take the risk of believing that I love you, that you are the object of my delight, and that you're not in my crosshairs of my 30-06. I'm coming for you in that way. And so even in our suffering, where we are tempted to turn our attention away from pain, God is ever present. And the question becomes, are we willing to allow ourselves to be seen in that moment? And the way, and this is not like in the fragments of our imagination, this is in our embodied experience with other human beings. And so therefore, am I willing to go and be with those who suffer, like you're going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And are those who suffer, are they going to be willing to allow themselves to be seen by others in their suffering? How many do we know who are like, no, I don't want visitors. I don't want them to see me this way.
Right. Right.
No, well, no, y'all, I'm fine. I'm fine. No. It's just, no, like that. That's not true.
But what's going on there, Kurt? Why do people who are suffering, why do at least many of them, not all of them, but many of them have this desire to withdraw, to isolate, to not be seen? What's going on there?
Well, we would say that suffering, it really is this doorway into our grief. And my not wanting to be seen is my wanting to avoid myself. It's why, so when you articulated earlier that like the whole notion of going to see your friend tomorrow, there's a certain sense of like, I'm not sure I'm really comfortable with this.
Yeah.
And we might, and on the surface, we say, I'm not comfortable with going to see my friend. But really what we're saying, like, I'm not comfortable with what's actually already inside of me.
Yeah.
That's
So you're
waiting
saying
to come out.
for the people who are suffering, they are also going through that version in exposing themselves in terms of opening themselves to other people. They haven't come to peace and accepted their own condition.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And because it's terrifying. We say, look, we look around, we're not very good at loving one another. Like, just look at the world. We're bad at that. But we are even less able at allowing ourselves to be loved.
Yeah.
Less able at doing that. And I can't give what I don't have. And so no wonder I can't love people, because in the moment that I don't, it is a testimony to the part of me that has not yet itself been loved fully enough, that I haven't allowed for that.
Yeah.
And this is yet one more example, one more way in which God is saying, I really want you to let me love you in the middle of the worst moments that you can imagine. And do so through my body. Do so through the people who are in the room with you.
Kurt, it's as always a pleasure to be with the other Kurt.
Right on.
And we'll have to do this again soon. Thank you so much for joining
Pleasure.
us and sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Curtis, a pleasure to be with you. And I look forward to it maybe again as soon as we can. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. And listeners, we'll be back together next week when we once again gather around the campfire.